We as a data science technologist community, we have a belief that if we can predict X better, that will lead to more sales, whatever it is. If we can provide a better layout for the warehouses, if we can tell them when they're going to have to restock the front bins, that's going to lead to more sales or reduce costs or whatever. It's sometimes drawing the connection and drawing the line between the metrics and the dollars that gets hairy.
If AI has ever made you stop and think, wait, what is happening? You're not alone. I'm Mo, and I'm a security researcher asking the same questions. On Curiouser and Curiouser, we're having open conversations with experts, researchers, and leaders working at the edge of this space, talking through how AI is taking shape, what's shifting, and how people inside the work are thinking about it as it happens. So join us and listen in as the conversation takes shape. Hello, and welcome back to Curiouser and Curiouser. I'm Mo, and today we have David Wendt with a silent D from Sherwin-Williams. He's currently there leading AI governance and innovation. However, I'm more excited about his history as a Dungeons & Dragons dungeon master. I will let him introduce himself, but I just had to throw that out there so you didn't forget to tell us more about that.
Yeah, thank you, Mo. So I've been thinking about the math that is AI governance for about 40 years. That led to me getting a PhD in statistics. That led to me spending 30 years on keyboard as a lone wolf data scientist, a mad scientist data scientist, director. But recently, in the last 2 years, I've stepped entirely away from the keyboard to really focus on the space of generative AI and specifically the governance of it. It is a new, different way of thinking about things. And I find, an incredible amount of enjoyment from it. And as Mo said, along the way, during that 30 years, I've also been a dungeon master. I've written for a number of gaming books. And as I look back over both my career as a data scientist and as a dungeon master, I think there's a lot both can learn from one another.
Yeah. I'd actually like to hear a little bit more about that. I know that there's a bunch of different, like in education, right? And psychiatry, or psychology, there's this like correlation between like using stories and being able to actually use a tabletop RPG to kind of work through trauma. That said, I don't think, as much as some people would say our field is traumatic, I don't know, or I don't see too many places where we can kind of use Dungeons and Dragons to kind of draw analogies. However, I do know that you're working on a D&D governance framework. So I think that's actually really interesting because when you think about it, I play Call of Cthulhu, but I think dungeon master to dungeon keeper, we can kind of be real. At the end of the day, we have final say and final judgment over like the rules. So if we need to justify a decision that we're making in the game, in the moment for the player's experience, we do that. I guess when you look at it from a security program or actually, implementing policy, it feels like we have a little bit of the same kind of final say, like flexibility that we need to play around with. So it's pretty interesting, especially in a field where we need to have deterministic proof when we make these decisions. So I would love to hear more about how you've applied D&D to your governance framework.
You got the right starting point, right? I grew up in a household. We played games. We played card games. We played board games. And yes, cards and dice and board games have randomness to them. You pretty much, when you played, say, euchre or pinochle with regular players, you knew how things were going to play out. There was not a whole lot of randomness, unless you were like me and you were like, well, what'll happen if I try this? But then discovered Dungeons and Dragons. And it shifted the paradigm from deterministic, or largely deterministic, to largely non-deterministic, leaving a lot of randomness, a lot of interpretation on the table. And I think that's the first parallel to generative AI and AI governance is we've had to shift the paradigm. we can put rules down, we can talk about process, but we're inherently in a non-deterministic world now. And so those rules and processes have to be more like a guideline than strict rulings. The second thing I would say is really around, I've learned so much about communication. You'd spent 30 years as a dungeon master, and periodically you get this idea, I'll have this great secret and I'll surprise my players with it. And more often than not, that collapses, falls flat on its face, because they're not prepared to be in that surprise with you. It's the same space, right? It's the same thinking. You must communicate constantly with across the organization, not so much that they are going to form the rules with us, just so much that they understand the rules and they feel that we've been talking to them. And that's been, realizing that coming into this role has been huge. And then really, I think the third one, and you touched on this a little bit, is, role-playing games, Dungeons & Dragons, Call of Cthulhu, there are books after books after books printed, and you can have a pile of books as tall as I am, all kinds of rules and all kinds of stats and all kinds of numbers and all kinds of whatever. In the end, at least at this point in my game master career, I don't look at those books anymore at the table. I might check something afterwards beforehand, but those are the guidelines. Those are the rules that are written down. So if we have a disagreement at the table, if we're not quite sure how to play something out, we have something to reference. And that ultimately is what you said is, I really talk internally about we record our processes, we record our rules so we can be intentional when we break them, right? In D&D, at least at my tables, there's something called the rule of cool. And basically that is, okay, you as a player have just described something so cool that I'm going to give you advantage because I don't want you to fail. I want that coolness to emerge in play. Absolutely the same thing here. We're having conversations right now about Replit and who do we release that to? And it's this balance of like, well, if we give it to too many people, it'll get crazy. I'm like, yeah, but think of the amazing things they can create that we wouldn't be thinking of by ourselves.
Yeah. So just for like folks that don't know what Replit is, they actually started as just a smaller company that was kind of just like doing a lot of like code development, right? It was just how to deploy software and how to kind of manage it, right? And they've kind of expanded those offerings to like full on application and site development and deployment with AI, which is the really, really cool part. Actually, there's one thing that you mentioned that was the rule of cool, right? I feel like that has like, again, you said it before, it has like so much good application here. And then you did mention something about surprise. To tie all of that together, I think professionally, and even as a DM, I think we can both relate to this. Well, my players would say that I am out there to make sure that they lose horribly. And it is the coolest, horrific ending to their character as possible. But that's the actual opposite, right? It's really to build an experience that is true to the world, but also feels good for them. So what I try to do is make sure that they understand the constraints of the world and the limits of the magic system and all of these kind of things so that when they go to do something, they understand the real implications of it. And in a way, that's like making them smarter and making them more aware and giving them the information that they need. I think we're trying to do the same thing when it comes to AI governance, where we're trying to keep everyone like inform them of the uncomfortable reality and some of these like real limitations. But at the same time, like I think we've lost this like piece of awareness that has kind of made our users feel a little bit I don't want to say dumber, but I feel like less informed about the decisions they make when it comes to AI because of how fast and easy it is to use. So I guess on all of that, like again, you can't always predict what these systems are doing or understand all the processes that take place in the black box. You're only there for like the ending piece. So how do you feel like I guess how does that translation process now work? Or how has it fundamentally changed now that, our partners are totally different?
Yeah, they're coming from a different perspective. It's deterministic to non-deterministic, right? I think part of the challenges we face is, and it may be because they don't feel informed, a lot of our partners are looking to the media, looking to marketing to say, oh, that's a cool thing we could do. Can we do that here? And that's okay. But it also causes us some challenge because marketers tend to talk about things before things are done or ready. Commercials don't talk about all the data structure that needs to go in underneath. A lot of the things that have always been true are just as true as before. So that's a challenge. But, I think there's a truism, and that's what I try to teach, junior data scientists that I work with. Our partners know we're smart. Our partners know what we're doing. So it is not our job to go into a room or get on a video call with them and prove how smart we are. Our role is to help them feel smart. And that's the really hard part. That's where the translation comes in. Can I, and again, we were talking about it earlier today, people want RAG for everything, and maybe sometimes they just want data extraction from a document. How do we start to shift the conversation from words, some of which they've heard us using, but words they've heard elsewhere, to what's the real use case? Why do you want to pull data out of this? Is it to put it into a database? Is it to have a conversation with your documents? Is it, and then let the folks who are professional at it figure out the best solution for you or a good solution for you. But that's tough. A lot of egos have to get out of the way to have that conversation. First of all, the ego of the technologist, but also the ego, you're often talking to senior leaders. And to say, well, you're using that wrong is not always a career help. Sometimes that's a little bit of an inhibitor. So, really building relationships, having that communication, and translating from the technical how it works to the more touchy-feely, what do you need from it?
Yeah. You said you said something along the lines of like security kind of being an inhibitor, right? Like kind of slowing things down, kind of stalling. And I have a lot of friends who would say they feel the same exact pressure around that, right? Um, but I think it's because of how reactive security teams have been, just overall, especially like I would say, especially GRC teams. I don't think that there's ever been a time where like I've worked with a GRC professional who wasn't really great at their job. Like ironically, like I would love to say that someone I've worked with was horrible, but I've worked with some great people and I've been fortunate to. But always, it always feels like they are one step behind because of the stuff that they have to work with. So I'm wondering, like, it's always responding to regulation or incidents or pressure, right? So I wish there was some way to create some space for GRC to kind of, or just anyone in security really, like having more space to kind of make these decisions. And in some cases, uh, let's just imagine having like a really well funded security program, right? Like, what do you think could be built in like one of these kind of environments that would enable that space to be had?
The one thing I'm working on putting in place is a generative AI dedicated red team. Red teaming being, essentially people you bring in to try and break your stuff before bad actors do. And I think that's really important. The research I've done says something along the lines of a single breach can cost $6 million. And, for a tenth of that, you could put in a pretty solid team. The challenge you're facing, and I want to dive into the time it takes, is not new, right? And it goes into, it almost drags me back to Dungeons and Dragons and really the origins of the game. Dungeons and Dragons started as a war game, or started as simulation of historical battles. Well, those historical battles are now fought on the digital battlefield. And what happens is somebody gets a new weapon, people respond to build a better defensive wall, which drives people to build a better weapon. And so this is just happening faster and faster. And if you then mix Replit or things like it into the game, it can happen even faster than before. So what you need is a combination of, and this is the truth going to be throughout AI generation, for generative AI for a long time, an AI tool that is running sort of constantly looking for abnormalities, and a human team, preferably, that is actively pushing the boundaries and trying to break other things. And that's where the investment, it can't be one or the other, it has to be both. But you said something, about giving our risk teams, and I would extend this to a lot of our technology teams, giving them space. One of the early uses for generative AI was efficiency, right? Write emails faster, write papers faster, now code faster. And I had a lot of leaders who were like, yeah, but that's not savings for us. We don't want them going home early. And for a while, it's like, okay, that's a little close-minded. But I agree. Actually, they shouldn't go home early. Do those things, do them in an accelerated way. And that time you've saved, now take the breather you need to take to think about what's next and how to be prepared for the next thing, rather than running like bull through multiple China shops, just trying to kick things out as you go.
It's not a position that I envy. Although, like as a builder as well, it feels like if we slow down at all, we're already behind, right? So it's almost like you're either the bull in the China shop, or you're not even in a storefront, like you're not even there.
There's a couple of responses to that. First of all, I think we all think we're further behind than we are. And every time I talk to folks outside, and I compare what we're doing to other folks, at least in our peer set, we're right up in the front grouping, right? But it doesn't feel like it. And I think that's the bigger part. It's the feeling. Things are changing so fast. How could we ever be at the forefront? And so, I don't think we should. Maybe there are some companies that should be, but companies in manufacturing, companies in sales, so many companies, they don't need to crack the bleeding edge. They need to say, hey, this function in the company needs help. We need to distribute our products better, or we need to speed up our time to failure in our research areas, or had this conversation this week. We just need someone to act as the intern as we review our tax law stuff. Have someone go and review that. That's a great use for generative AI. Ironically, our legal department said they would never use generative AI, and now they're asking for it. But that's for another discussion. But I think honestly we have to give ourselves grace. I think we have to say, I am confident enough in my ability and in my teams to take the time to breathe, to do it right. Or in other words, and I heard this early in my career, slow down to go fast. I thought that was ridiculous at the time, and now I think it is absolutely brilliant. I have shifted from bouncing from task to task to task to task to stopping working with my generative AI to identify what's the next most valuable thing I can be working on. And I think maybe not directly, but I think that can apply to a lot of folks. What is the next most important thing I can be doing?
Yeah. And you touched on something really important. When you mentioned kind of having an intern 24/7, right? In the same kind of idea frame as that, you take what you mentioned about looking for a red teaming kind of like activity in your organization. I think that is actually like one of the killer use cases for testing, which is like awesome, right? It's like being able to do continuous testing, continuous governance, 24/7 pen testing to like an extent, right? Like, for example, I can imagine like even like a chatbot, right? Imagine a chatbot is just sitting in a test environment and like all day, every day, 24/7. When your your human red team is sleeping, it's consistently getting harassed by like an AI on the other side that is just constantly giving you a flywheel of attack response. You get to go and look at this over. You look at the telemetry, you see how things are changing. You kind of make it a self-improvement mechanism even, right? I would love to know kind of what, like, as you're looking at things like continuous security solutions, including red teaming, what that kind of looks like for you and how you see implementing it into your security strategy.
That is a really powerful question. And it's one of those where I know it will work for me. I don't know if it works for anyone else, right? Despite being 30 years in a hands-on keyboard, statistician, data scientist, I'm an incredibly visual person. And so what I would be looking for, and it's how I described it over 2 years ago when I took this role, I want a dashboard that I can come in on Monday morning or whenever, turn it on and see where things are yellow, or heaven forbid, where things are red, and being able to immediately reach out to the people who are responsible for those areas to make sure they know that's there. I can't control anything, but if I can start to see, we're getting a lot of weird things around our company chatbot, for instance, to be able to reach out to that team and say, did we change something, or are we facing a new set of attacks? That becomes powerful. Back to communication, relationship, etc. Now the thing, and this is the crazy part, right? I don't want that just for me. I want that for not only me and my team, but all the way up. I want my CEO to have the confidence that they can go in and look at any point, whether it's a specific project or just in general, and know what's going on. Now, I say that knowing that no executive will ever do that more than once, but I want that there for them. I want them to have that confidence that if they had to, if for some reason I got hit by a bus, they could still get the same information.
And the good thing is the build versus buy argument has only gotten better. So like when you say like, oh, I know it works for me, but it might not work for someone else. Well, guess what? You're currently in an era where like more teams are actually building than buying. And you can now build something that is really well tailored for your security program. Now, let's take it up a notch, right? You mentioned that it's really difficult to figure, like, you just want to see green, yellow, red, right? You want really easy signals. But when we've got non-determinism in the process, right? Like, it complicates testing, debugging is difficult, evaluation's hard, right? What if you can't reproduce the prior model behavior? What if you can't find the results that you got like 5 minutes ago? Like, what do you do, right? So like, how do you know that your AI systems over time are actually getting better or worse? What does improvement even mean now, right? Like, all of these different things I think are really challenging to like kind of understand. So from your perspective, what does green, yellow, red even look like?
You need to take it out of the moment. Because at any given moment, right, ultimately, generative AI models are probability models. Full stop. They're really fancy ones, but in the end, they're probability models. If you take that into account, then if I'm looking at any given property, whether it's accuracy, whether it's latency, whether it's whatever, if I see consistent behavior that is positive, that's easy, right? That's green. Then you have this dimension thing, right? You might see a spike that's bad once, but if it's only bad once, it's probably not a red. It might be a yellow, depending on the importance of that system. But if I see spikes that are happening regularly, even moderate spikes, that definitely is pushing me up into yellow. And if I start to see consistent, and I'm waving my hands like madman over here, high level spikes, that becomes red. And so it's to me, you're relying on the laws of probability, which says if it's a fluke, you're not going to see a repetition right away. The other part of that then is, how conservative do you want to be? I have spent most of my career in very conservative companies. So anytime there is a spike, anytime the chatbot is giving a slightly wrong answer, we want to be aware of it. So that's definitely a yellow, if not a red. There are other companies not as conservative. They may be able to run it with wing it. Go, oh, we got some spikes, but overall, it's not too bad. It's getting us what we want. It's making maybe not sales, it's predicting who might buy from us. If it hits 80% of the time, that's better than we get with cold calling. That's okay, right? And so none of these metrics, and it's been true forever. No metric exists in a vacuum. The number of people who said, well, is 57% good? Is it better than you used to do? Did you used to do 50%? That's good. If you used to do 60%, not so good. And so everything's got to be dealt with in context, and especially when we get to non-deterministic, because we're not in raw chaos. As much as some people want to say, we're not in raw chaos. Everything is still predictable. It's just a lot more variable than people have been used to.
Yeah, I was going to say, even if you look at some standards like Salsa for open source, and you look at MITRE, right? And you look at the MITRE, especially the MITRE AI maturity one, right? That is all based in even NIST. I mean, you could even apply NIST to this, right? But they're all maturity frameworks in a sense, where you can kind of set where you are and then see exactly what steps you need to get to the next level of maturity. And it doesn't mean that if you move from a level 1 to a level 2, or right, it doesn't mean that oh, you're bad at level 1. It just means, oh, this is where your organization's at today. This is the bare minimum. And that, if that's sufficient today, then this is how you move forward, right? And depending on the organization, you actually have different priorities. But let's go and look at yours, for example, right? There's a lot of product development and customer engagement, supply chain, sustainability. You have all these different priorities that exist throughout, just product and the offerings that you've got, right? So what does that look like in terms of when you need to actually apply some of this stuff? Because these frameworks were not meant to cover, I think, a multifaceted organization that's oh, you do very heavy manufacturing and supply chain. Oh, but you also have this really strong technology customer experience piece. Are you applying it separately for different organizations, or are you more trying to find a one shoe fits all good enough, and then figure it out on the nuances for everyone?
It is very easy at the top of the house. We sell paint. The more dollars we bring in and the more gallons of paint we sell, the happier our CEO and the street are. That's very, very easy. At the bottom, at the most detailed, it's pretty easy. I've sat down with our data scientists and I said, look, I need stuff in these 7 categories. I need you to start logging it. And I got less grumbling than I expected, which was lovely. But, the response is, well, but this accuracy measure doesn't work for me. And the things I do, can I use a different one? Yes, right? There are categories of things. It's the middle ground that is really, really difficult. We as a data science technologist community, we have a belief that if we can predict X better, that will lead to more sales, whatever it is, right? If we can provide a better layout for the warehouses, if we can tell them when they're going to have to restock the front bins, that's going to lead to more sales or reduce costs or whatever. It's sometimes drawing the connection and drawing the line between the metrics and the dollars that gets hairy. And it's also hairy because is it the model that made it better? Is it the people who reacted to the model that made it better? Were there other features or things changed at the time? Everyone wants a piece of that improvement. So that's a real challenge. So I haven't really answered your question yet, but I'm getting there. The realization I've had over the last couple of months is this: we should not be measuring AI, full stop. We should be measuring the use cases that we are changing that happen to leverage AI. So if our big focus is raw material pricing, that's where we think we're going to make our bang for our buck this year, making stuff up here. Then I don't care what I do. You use traditional AI, you use generative AI, you use a hybrid approach, you throw darts at the board. I'm looking for more effective pricing. Look, to simplify, say, I'm looking for lower prices on our raw materials, which then lead to better margin, et cetera, down the line. Nothing in there is AI specific. And so that is the shift that I'm trying to bring for that middle section is I don't really care what model you're using. I care if you're getting the results you are after. Because at that point, the client, the customer, the partner, they can own what's next, right? We provided you a model. We got our raw material prices down by 10% and announce that up. If you're a good partner, they're going to take you with you. You don't need to say, we own this half of that. And so that's really where I'm going to be pushing my teammates, my peers, the younger data scientists to really be thinking not about what we do. Again, back to what I said earlier. I know you're smart. I know you can make good models. Your job is to provide the clients what they need and make them look good.
The problem that you're describing traditionally is a data literacy problem, right? Because now we're saying, hey, we shouldn't be judging these models just to say that we're using AI, right? Instead, we have this outcome, and how much of this outcome can we attribute to the changes that we've made, like with AI, or at least like how have we used AI to kind of improve this outcome, right? So has it made us 10% better? Has it made us 20% better? And then kind of we go down from there, like, oh, this is the exact use case that we've used versus like this other use case which we just threw into production, right? Like use case A is actually better than B. And then you do all the analysis because there's also a cost to AI, right? Which is a whole other episode. But it's kind of like, oh, like how much does it actually cost to run these models 24/7, right? Are we running it in infrastructure we own? Yada yada yada, right? So I'm wondering if data literacy, or at least literacy, is the right metaphor anymore, right? Because again, I think literacy, when I think about it, I think about a book, right? But books don't change words every time you look at the same page. In this case, are we trying to teach people to be really literate about something that's fundamentally changing all the time? And in that case, maybe harder to really Like the same thing you knew on day one is now different on day two, and the metrics may actually be describing something entirely different.
So the funny thing is I have in the back of my mind to leverage technology to write a book where the words do change on the page from read to read. So everything's possible, but your point is very well taken. I have a number of conversations, regular conversations. We're fortunate to have an AI literacy team dedicated to this space. And I have a lot of conversations with them. As a former educator, as a former professor, I have thoughts, and I constantly have to urge them to think outside of the traditional teaching methods. Right? We can't. If this isn't Excel, this isn't if you put equals if parentheses this thing, you get the same answer every time. Right? That's not where we are. We're in a space, as you say, that is constantly changing, that the answer you get will be different than the answer I get if we put the same thing into the same chat engine. And so we can't do that. And so, the things I'm urging, and I both urge our literacy folks, and I've had the opportunity to talk to high school students and high school faculty, I want you to start thinking about critical thinking. I want you to start thinking about problem solving, puzzle solving. I want you to think about these broader, more intelligence-driven, creative-driven skills. Intelligence isn't the right word, but cerebral, that's the word I was looking for. Because if I am thinking about the problem holistically, then I will bring in concerns about cost. I will bring in concerns about this metric. It was just another reason to not really worry about measuring the AI, but measuring the thing you're trying to do with the AI. But that's tough. We're not set up in this country to teach people how to think critically, how to solve puzzles, and it's really unfortunate, and it's going to be a challenge. Now, the good news is, at least in the greater Cincinnati, Cleveland area, we got some great teachers and some fantastic students who are learning fast and adapting quickly. So I actually have very high hopes. I think it's going to be people of my generation and the generation or two following that are probably really going to struggle the most here. Not unlike, and I'm shifting a little bit, I understand, when robotics came to the auto industry, right? Yes, some jobs were lost, but mostly jobs were transformed. And they had to think differently. Instead of, I can do this and I can pull that, I can do the other thing. I now need to think about how to make the robotic piece do what I needed to do so that the next guy is ready for that piece. But yeah, how do come and bring it back full circle? How do we teach people about this stuff? I think we teach with story. I think we teach with allegory. Really going back to the beginning, I think we teach with what ifs, role playing. What if I'm noodling? It's not quite done, but I'm hoping by the end of the summer to have essentially a role playing experience that I can take to conferences with me and have a half dozen people sit around a table and basically play through a governance issue. Hopefully in a little more fun than the real thing, but to have that experience available to them, I think would be helpful.
I actually want to maybe push you to go a little bit deeper too, right? Because you spent most of your career helping people make sense of data and technology, right? And like you said, the people who are going to struggle the most are actually not the younger generation. I think the younger generation is struggling right now because let's be frank, we've created a world where they don't have opportunity. And that's because we've decided that entry level jobs, we're going to replace it with AI, or we're going to replace it with a couple of agents. And as many times or as much as we'd like to say, we're not doing this, we're not replacing humans, we are going to replace humans. We are taking away tasks that are these like bundle of tasks that would make our interns, these bundle of tasks that make your level ones, your IC ones, whatever your organization calls them. Every task that they do, we're automating in some way, shape, or form. Review these pull requests that are, that are really basic. Cool, we can do that with AI now. Guess what? We're not going to pay an intern another 10 hours to go over pull requests and PRs and bug tests, right? So we are slowly but surely removing the opportunities for them to learn. And some organizations have caught on and said, you know what, we're eventually going to need people because of turnover, right? So yeah, we need to keep some of these roles. But I think on a larger scale, we're not really preparing for that. So I'm wondering what how do we really build resilience for for this older generation, in my opinion, because they're going to need it the most. Because I think this younger generation, they're going to completely just take the ball with it and say, you know what? In this space where our opportunity was previously going to be for these massive companies, we're going to build our own thing. We're going to do our own things. And like I think earlier last year, Carta had released a study that showed there's been a massive increase in the amount of single founder companies with no funding because of AI, right? I will attribute most of it to AI, but I'm sure there are a bunch of causes. So I think we need to create resiliency in the older generations if we're not going to give younger generations the opportunity.
Yes. So, and I apologize, I can't remember the name of the book right now. But I read a book or a speaker who talked to this very thing. And one of the things that he said really stuck away with me. He looked at dozens of professions. And every time automation of some sort came in, the next cadre were not as good. Every field except one. The one that was not, it was actually an improvement. It was bomb disposal. And it was bomb disposal because before automation, the gentleman, the senior would be out there with the bomb. Sure, they'd have a mic on, but they're more focused on not blowing themselves up than explaining what they're doing. The juniors back in the truck, a good distance away, can't really see, can only rely. Once you put this flip on it, once you do the robotics, now the junior is driving the joysticks, driving the robot, and the senior's over his shoulder, guiding and explaining. My parents told me video games weren't going to be good for anything. I agree. I disagree. I also don't want to do bomb disposal for a living. But so yeah, there's a real concern. I do think I've had the opportunity to work with some ethics groups at some universities. I do think this is an ethical piece that we are missing, right? Should people cheat? Could people cheat? Could do it? No, it's what are we doing for the next generation? Because you're spot on, right? I do all sorts of things every day now that 5 years ago, 10 years ago in the same position, I would have passed down to my next level to do and figure out. What do we do for our seniors? So for the junior folks, I think we are ethically bound as organizations and carekeepers of our world to make sure we continue to bring in junior folks and continue to give them the opportunity to learn on real things. And maybe that's not quite as cost effective as going pure AI, but to your point, we're going to need it. Folks my age and older, and even a bit younger, I share your concern, right? I came from a generation where you were a jock or you were unpopular. Full stop, right? Um, and we have taken that, we've turned it around and said, hey, look, we tech guys, we kind of know what we're doing. And we've been fairly successful for that. But there is still a lot of socially driven roles in a company, sales organizations, marketing, that now they're concerned, and rightfully so, right? A salesperson, throughout my career, even before for generative AI, they don't want to give up their secret sauce. I'm like, but I know you know these people's favorite sports teams. If you give those to us, if we can put them in our database, then marketing can send customized materials to them based on their sports ball teams. They don't want to give it up. This is worse. This is worse. You're going to come in. I'm going to come in and say, here's your list of AI approved people to call. You don't want that. They know who to call, and I believe they know who to call. But the junior folks don't, and the junior folks aren't going to learn in the same way that the senior folks do. I did an analysis probably 10, 15 years ago. You could see generationally how business changed. The oldest sales people in the company I was in at the time, most had face-to-face visits. That's where most of their dollars were coming from. The next generation down, it was phone calls. Next generation down, it was electronic communication. And what was really fascinating, when I split it by gender, it was offset by a generation. So women of the second oldest generation were behaving like men of the oldest generation. They're echoing what they saw their mentors being, and it then carried down that way. I think there are a lot of reasons that's not great, but what it does illustrate is the younger generations, to your point, will adapt. The older ones, I think we just have to frame things, communicate things, build the relationships. Like I said, I won't go into a lot. At our sales meeting last week or 2 weeks ago, we announced our internal sales-focused chatbot. It's really a product-driven chatbot, and it really was targeted towards our younger folks in the stores. We have a problem with turnover with those younger sales folks. And I believe that I don't feel smart. I come in, someone asks me what stain I should put on my deck. I don't know. And I don't want to ask my boss every time. This should help with that. That should improve retention, improves profitability all the way down the line. And when you're in a company like mine, where the CEO literally started in the stores, a lot of the C-suite literally started in the stores, that's important. And so I have no great answer other than build the relationships, let them know you're not here to take their jobs. You're here to help them do what they do better and get the stuff that they don't do well out of their way.
That was like really well put. A lot better than I could have put it. Or like, I think some of the conversations that I've had around it have really just been kind of skeptical and kind of pessimistic, like, and to be frank, realistic too, right? But there's also that other side of reality that's like, okay, well, like, what if we focused on enablement? And the other piece is like, well, we haven't really talked about what it's actually doing to like senior engineers and principal engineers, right? And that's like it's hard, right? Because now it's like you've got these people up top with like less support but more responsibility, and then if they get burnt out and tired, like who does that get passed on to? So it's a pretty interesting dilemma we've gotten ourselves into. But you're right, the way out of it is really by enabling. And you said something really interesting about like kind of echoing, like one generation echoing another, right? I know recently, like I've switched my job so many times. And, I've been really fortunate to be in organizations that have just been like, yeah, Mo, go run with it. Go and try this thing out. Right. And kind of give me the flexibility to go and like learn and build. And recently I like worked with someone on sales. Right. And I know nothing about sales. All my friends would say that I could probably sell them on one of the many hobbies that I have, but like I've never made a dollar from any sticker I've ever tried to sell. I just can't sell anything, right? But I think the interesting thing in working with the sales team is that they are really forward looking. And when, let's just say, we look at competitive analysis or competitive, just doing that, like this is something that I had to do recently. And it's kind of like, well, like how do I enable these people that don't necessarily have all the insight into this particular expertise or field in security engineering, the ability to go and use this at like a higher level, right? It's part like me writing something down and then telling them, and then also using AI to like help generate like a report that is more in a sales language, which is something I don't know, right? So it's honestly been a great glue between fields. And it's like if they and there's another whole layer to this where like there's a bunch of inaccuracies introduced by AI. So like when I write something, I have to go and review it. On the other side, when I translate it into sales language, they have to review it, right? And there's this back and forth that we have where it's like, oh, this works, this doesn't work, right? And we get better and better at doing this. But it's one way where it's kind of like now that jobs are kind of like we can't really echo each other as much, right? It's like, how do we inform each other and kind of get to know each other? Especially because I believe in this next generation, these lines between jobs and specialties, they're really disappearing. Where folks who are focused or like really laser focused in a single area are now performing in other areas where we originally wanted people to become really deep specialists. Um, Turns out the jack of all trades has started to shine, especially when AI comes in and enables them to level up mastery across all these different areas. So I think it's so interesting how the battlefield has kind of changed, both in terms of seniority and in terms of specialization and literacy and education and just everything. I don't think everything AI is bad. I don't think everything AI is good, but it most certainly has been dynamic, if that's to say the least. The one place where I think AI will never take over, and I know it's already been done, is creating a really good story for DMs. And nothing will change that. And it goes back to the sales analogy where you're like, you're the favorite teams of the people that you sell to. Well, your players the best, and you know exactly what makes them tick. I'm sure one day it'll be easier to generate scenarios that are like that, but don't think we'll exactly get there. It kind of makes me think of the book Death of a Salesman too, where it was just the salesman who was unable to adapt to new techniques and was finding that the customers were just not the same and the people weren't the same, and he, even though he was the same, was no longer suitable for the world because of how fast it was changing. And I don't think we're seeing the death of literal salesmen right now, but I think we're seeing this kind of death of a salesman theme take place across industries, where we're finding these folks that are locked in traditional values kind of being forced out of their comfort zones. And I don't think that there's ever been a time where someone's been pushed out of their comfort zone, if they stepped up to the plate and they really embraced it, that they were left behind. So I don't think we'll see many people left behind. I think we'll see people become displaced for a while and understand what comfort now looks like. But all that said, I know we are just about at time. And, do you have like anything that you would kind of encourage folks to do? Or I don't know, what are your final thoughts on just this topic?
I think we have a responsibility as human beings to embrace change and accept humility. If you can do those two things, I think you can adapt to almost anything. And I think that was part of why I'm in this role now, right? You may say going from hands-on keyboard data scientist to governance, it seems insane. Yeah, but I was open to the change. I was looking for change, and I was not going in like I knew everything. I was looking for partners and looking for getting cohesion and cooperation. And when I look back on my career, those two things seem to be where my successes have come, rather than trying to blindly charge forward the way I've always done it.
Where can people find you on the socials? Do you have anything coming up? You got any new books? Any open game sessions?
Probably the easiest place to find me is LinkedIn. I try to do at least one post a week on Mondays, just really my ramblings and my thinkings around governance and culture and change and all those things. I believe you guys have my speaker page link, so you can share that. It is unfortunately not a quick one to rattle off. And what do I have coming up? Not a whole lot right now. I'm waiting for the freeze to come out of Cleveland. I think the thing to watch for is find me at a conference, talk to me about the game I'm designing, and maybe we can throw some dice.
Thanks so much, and see y'all next time.
If this episode helped cut through the noise, like or subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Thanks for spending time with us. Until next time, stay curious.